Welcome back everyone to another video on the Vixen Victory channel. Today we're going to be talking about Neuvillette. Now, we are normally technically supposed to be going through our character archive, and although that is true, and technically we'd be over here somewhere-ish, it does almost make sense though that we are going to be stopping by and looking at the characters on the banners. So every time the banners kind of reset, they give us 4 stars and the 2 5 stars. We'll be talking about them. Obviously, Neuvillette's today, and we'll be going on through Zhongli next, and then we'll be talking about the 3 4 stars afterwards as well. But talking about Neuvillette specifically, you really start to see why he is the best character or DPS in the game. Yes, he has extremely high numbers that he can hit, or maybe even those numbers that are just happening so consistently as a barrage of damage. Also a character that doesn't have to focus on doing reactions usually, or maybe specifically focusing on like Vaporize or something where the reaction itself has increased the damage basically. Instead, you have a character that can go into a quote-unquote mono hydro team and still perform extremely well. So I think that when looking at Neuvillette though, we need to focus on him as obviously he is a catalyst user, but he's a charge attack mainly focused character, mainly taking a lot of that time to make a distance between him and other units or enemies to really keep himself alive. But that's the other great thing about Neuvillette. It's extremely difficult to almost kill him, because a lot of the times when you use your skills in your burst, and we'll talk about that in a second, you're increasing his HP most of the time. So it's very, very difficult to actually get him to a scary level of HP, even with other characters like Farina, one of his best supports, draining said HP. And once again, the change in HP that he does is going to increase his damage even more, or give him stats that are going to help him do more damage. So let's go ahead and talk about talents, looking at the normal attack, skill, and burst, how you should be leveling them, what that really looks like. So first and foremost, looking at the normal attack, skill, and burst, I would really say overall, the normal attack talent is going to be the highest of priority. This is kind of easy just because with him as a character, he's doing most of his damage through the normal attack talent by doing charge attacks. And that is based off of obviously in this talent here. If you look at his talent specifically, the charge attack equitable judgment is what you're focusing on, and getting that higher and higher is going to increase obviously with the level, increase the damage that you do. So that's the major one you're focusing on. The skill and the burst, in my personal opinion, I think have the same merit and can be leveled the same. If you are focusing on one specifically to crown or something like that, that would be the normal attack talent. The skill and burst can stay at like level 8 or level 9, or maybe a level or 2 behind where you're currently at with the normal attack talent. Once again, mainly focusing into that normal attack talent is the best way to really kind of focus specifically building Neuvillette the best way. Now, I do want to state that the skill and burst do actually do some pretty significant damage when you actually use them, but we're going to talk about that when we actually look at them in the talent info. But going back to the normal attack talent, let's talk about the charge attack empowerment legal evaluation. When you are charging up or holding down the normal attack button, you're going to have a seal of arbitration that's going to slowly configure itself. In this state, Neuvillette can move and change facing and also absorb any source water droplets in a certain AoE. The droplets that he'll create are going to come from the skill and burst, and sometimes from other characters. Every droplet he absorbs will increase this formation speed of the seal and will also heal Neuvillette. So while you're doing this and holding basically that normal attack talent down, you're going to be able to pick up these source water droplets, and you're also going to be able to make that seal of arbitration go a lot quicker while also healing yourself. What that kind of looks like, at least when the seal of arbitration is going to be happening, you're going to see a little seal right here start from the bottom and immediately touch to the top. Now, I didn't completely complete the seal, so if you don't complete the seal, you are just going to do what I just did there, which is just a regular charge attack damage hit, which is going to be based off of his attack, which as you can see you don't really go into at all. But when you actually do get all the way to that, when the charging is stopped and the symbol is not formed, you're going to just do a regular charge attack. But when you actually completely form the seal of arbitration, then a charge attack equitable judgment will then be unleashed. This damages Hydro AoE damage, dealing continuous amounts of it for about 3 seconds long, but it will not consume any of your stamina. If Neuvillette's HP is above 50%, he will continuously lose HP while using this attack. Now, this can be useful because of his 4-piece set, but actually in the talent itself, you don't need to decrease your HP to actually get the damage out. So keep that in mind. You don't actually have to have him, above the 50% threshold to actually make him do anything. Maybe for some other characters, obviously, once again, like Farina, but actually with him as a character, there's really no need besides you're just going to lose the HP if you're above 50%. Looking past the normal attack talent though, let's look at the skill and the burst, the ways that you're going to get those source water droplets. Remember, as you're doing the charge attack, that empowerment basically, once you do this empowerment right here and you're creating the seal, then you're going to go right into the actual damage that you're going to be doing. It lasts for about 3 seconds. And you did see I was about max HP, and you slowly saw a decrease of that HP through using that actual charge attack. And you can even do it more, but as you can see, once this is going to be completed, you can't go any further than lower than the 20%. So as soon as you hit past the 50%, it will stop after it hits that 50%. It won't allow you to take any more away. Now let's go ahead and look at the skill. It states that it summons a raging waterfall that will deal AoE hydro damage to opponents in front of Neuvillette based on his max HP. After hitting an opponent, this skill will then generate 3 source water droplets near that opponent. The maximum amount of source water droplets you can pick up at one time to maximize the speed of basically grabbing and increasing the speed of that empowerment is going to be 3 source water droplets, so you can't get any more. Now, the Archie also states, because he is a Fontaine character, that he will also do a Spirit Breath Thorn when he uses the skill that will pierce opponents, dealing Pneuma-aligned hydro damage. So you're getting some extra Pneuma if specific enemies really need that. You can look at his Archie through the skill, and that's where you're going to be using it. We see through the skill you're going to have some nice ability, but honestly, this is a 12-second duration, and with 3 seconds of actual damage, this is a 9-second cooldown before you can use the skill after doing your charge attack damage. And yes, getting the charge attack one time is nice, and the damage, don't get me wrong, is great. But what happens when you want to do it again? Do you just have to wait 45,000 years for the charge attack, the Seal of Arbitration, to happen again? Because once you use a skill and you use those source water droplets, that speed basically instantaneously gets you to the next stage of his charge attack. Instead of waiting for that seal, the seal is almost instantaneously completed and gets you to your damage phase. But the burst is where that comes into next. The burst states that it unleashes waves that deal AoE hydro damage based on Neuvillette's max HP, and after a short interval, 2 waterfalls will descend and deal hydro damage in a somewhat smaller AoE, and will then generate 6 source water droplets within an area in front of them. So when you have basically the skill is producing 1 waterfall, the burst is basically just a bigger damage hit, but also it's creating 2 waterfalls and each giving 3 source water droplets to the character. So this is about 3 seconds of charge attack damage that he can do in his charge attack, and this is instantaneously one of those instances, and this is 2 more instances. So you can get about 9 instances out of this, or 3 instances out of the damage phase, but 9 source water droplets, and that is a lot of healing for your character, as well as a lot of HP change, which can help other characters as well as himself. Now, another passive talent that he has that is going to be what I was talking about before, with majorly looking at him creating a lot of reactions, usually with Neuvillette, with maybe other characters in the past, or even current characters, you're usually focusing on trying to create vaporize or melt to increase the damage number that you're doing. Some sort of reaction is the major way where you're, at the end of the day, getting a big damage number. But Neuvillette uses kind of maybe hydro specific reactions, but he doesn't care about, making a 40k damage number hit into an 80k with 1 vaporize every so often, because his amount of application is just too much for it. So at that point in time, when you see this raging waterfall of just constant hits on an enemy, it's very difficult for him to vaporize consistently. The other character probably can, but he really won't be able to. Now, looking at the first passive talent, it states that when a party member triggers a vaporize, basically any hydro-related reaction, 1 stack of past draconic glories will be granted to Neuvillette for 30 seconds with a max of 3 stacks. So you only need to create 3 reactions. Now, this does not mean that you have to have each of, 3 of these. It does not mean that you have to have a vaporize reaction, a frozen reaction, and an electrocharge reaction happen to get the max of 3 stacks. you could very easily do a Hydro Swirl, and another Hydro Swirl and still get the maximum of 3 stacks. If you look at the team that I've created here, this is Furina, Kazuha, and Xilonen. And honestly, you could throw another Hydro character in here instead of one of the others, and as long as you're creating 3 reactions of maybe Crystallize, the Hydro reaction into Crystallize, or you're doing a Hydro Swirl with Kazuha 3 times, as long as that's happening 3 times, it doesn't matter if it's the same reaction over and over again, you're going to be getting these 3 stacks. So it doesn't, once again, have to be separate ones. I know that is usually sometimes when people kind of first look at his passive talent, this is what they think, but you don't actually have to. It's a lot easier, and thankfully it's not like that at all, because that would be a little difficult at the end of the day for him to really do. Past Draconic Glories, what these stacks do is they cause Charge Attack, Equitable Judgment, that huge Kamehameha just beam of damage towards an enemy. That damage is then going to be increased by 110, 125, and 160% of its original damage based on the stacks that you have. So 1 stack is 110% damage, 2 stacks is 125% damage, and then 3 stacks is 160% damage of what you're already doing. Now, that does not mean an additional 160%. It means basically a 60% buff, a 25% buff, and a 10% buff. So if you had 1 stack, this does not mean that you have your initial 40,000 damage hit, and you're getting another 40 plus 10%, so another 44,000 damage. It means that you're getting another 4,000 damage on top of the 40,000 damage hit you're doing. So you're actually doing 44,000 instead of 40. Here, if we are taking the same number, a quarter of 40,000 is 10, so you just add 10 to 40, which is 50,000 damage that you're going to be doing. Instead of the 40Ks, you're now doing 50Ks. 160% is a little bit more difficult, and that's just because math decides to get difficult and maybe not so fun in the membrane. But basically at this point, quick math is it's about, I think, 64,000 damage with this hit here if you're doing a 40k, and now instead you're doing 64,000 damage. So you're easily starting to see how, yes, you can do a mono Hydro team of 4 Hydro characters, and maybe you can just not focus on doing reactions, but it does take a lot of damage potential away from Neuvillette, and even at a 40k damage hit, those 40ks are turning into 64k. So there's a 24,000 damage loss that you're getting from it, and it's a pretty big jump between 2 and 3, so I try to create as many reactions as possible before Neuvillette gets on field, and even if you have characters creating reactions from off field, that can actually be helpful as well to make sure he's getting the maximum buff here. Looking at the second passive talent, for each 1% of Neuvillette's current HP greater than 30% of his max HP, he will gain 0.6% Hydro damage bonus. Earlier I said it doesn't really matter about keeping your HP low. For specifically looking at the normal attack, what you kind of need to do here to actually do the damage, you don't have to, it's okay. You can still do the damage if you are below 50%. Don't get me wrong, you definitely can do that. But because of this second passive talent, you're going to want a healer in the team. Someone who's constantly being able to heal. Characters like Xilonen, the one I have in the team. Character like Yao Yao, who's on the banner, who's constantly healing from even off field. And a character like Beidou. Characters who can either protect them, like Zhongli, who's also on the banner. Shielders. People who are constantly healing or constantly shielding are going to be extremely strong for Neuvillette. And that's mainly just because you're trying to keep his HP as high as physically possible. What this maximum damage bonus or this bonus here means is it's 30% above the initial 30%. So you only need to have basically 60% max HP to get the buff, the maximum buff here, which is a pretty nice Hydro damage bonus buff as well, that being stated. So once again, the lowest amount of HP you ever want to be at with Neuvillette is actually 60%, not 50% with his buffs, which once again, another reason to keep him at a high HP, but another reason to keep him possibly as a healer. Because even though shielders, I want to go back to that really quickly, even though shielders will not be able to heal him, he does deplete his own HP while doing the charge attack. So technically, you wouldn't be able to fully kind of get the most out of this buff because he'll take his HP down to sometimes even lower than 50%. As you saw with what I did, he can actually take himself below 50%. So if you're not having someone constantly healing him and keeping him above or near 60%, this buff can kind of be a little bit, not a full waste, but about half of it can be a waste as well. So keep that in mind. There are little things here and there. Once again, constant reactions. Really, you only need 3 of them to happen. But having, some reactions happening from off-field while he's in his damage phase to make sure that they're happening, it does go for 30 seconds, so it doesn't need to be a lot, but it just needs to be enough where you're creating 3 of them with Hydro to make sure that he's actually getting the buff here. And the other thing is to try to keep him with a healer so that he can keep at 60% or above HP. Never mind, especially if you're running him with Farina, she's also draining his HP, never mind himself. He does have a way to heal himself, yes, with his skill and his burst, so it won't be too difficult with a shielder. I just mean to say it'll probably be a little bit easier with a healer. So there are nuances with his kit, but that's overall how he actually works as a character. Now, let's go a little bit beyond looking at him as a character and talk about his specific weapon options. This is going to be pretty basic because overall, obviously, Tome of the Eternal Flow is his best weapon. It is his personal weapon. And we don't really need to talk about his personal weapon because obviously it's his best in slot. It's a high crit damage stat, low base tech because we don't care about it, HP percent, charge attack damage, energy given back. A very good weapon overall. But there are other weapons that technically Neuvillette can use to a pretty good extent, and even weapons that have come out quote-unquote recently that can be pretty helpful to him, as well as older weapons that can be helpful as well. Looking at some other weapons that can be somewhat useful is something like Sacrificial Jade. I do want to talk about the 4-star actually first, and that is because this 4-star, this is a Battle Pass specific weapon, so it's not free to play, but the crit rate main stat on this weapon at level 90 is going to be 36.8%, and it's the ability at R1 states that when not on the field for more than 5 seconds, max HP will be increased by 32% and Elemental Mastery increased by 40, which you don't care about. But then the effects will be cancelled after the wielder has been on the field for 10 seconds. The reason why this weapon is actually, in my personal opinion, second to his personal weapon is because think about it. He has his skill and his burst. That is 3 different basically stacks of 3 source water droplets. So he can do his charge attack 3 times quickly with his skill, with his basically skill and burst to allow his charge attacks to happen. So honestly, I feel like this weapon is extremely good, and why I think that it is secondary to his personal weapon because of the huge buff that it can give. And it's also a crit main stat weapon while also giving him an insane amount of HP. Looking a little bit further kind of at other weapons that can be somewhat useful, going back to maybe 5 stars if you accidentally have them, is something like Jadefall Splendor, Beidou's weapon. It's an HP percent main stat weapon, but after using a burst or creating a shield, which you're not going to do really with Neuvillette, but after creating a burst, you have 3 seconds that you're going to restore some energy back, as well as gain an elemental damage bonus, which based off of your max HP, which Neuvillette goes into. And this could technically be helpful because that first damage hit after using your burst is going to be a lot of damage. That once you use your burst, pick up your source water droplets and do your huge damage hit, it's going to be pretty instantaneously. Those 3 seconds of damage that he's going to be doing are going to be insanely high. Now, that does mean as soon as that's done, you're waiting for your burst again to trigger the ability on the weapon, but it still does have an HP percent main stat to it, so it does kind of have some pretty strong capabilities here and there. But overall, I wouldn't say it's necessarily amazing, but it is kind of nice. I'll jump back to a different weapon, looking at 4 stars, and that is the Prototype Amber, looking at an HP percent main stat weapon here. Honestly, with the ability, it states that using an elemental burst regenerates 4 energy every 2 seconds for 6 seconds, so you're getting 12 energy, and this is just at R1. If you can get it to R5, it's going to be even more. And then all party members will regenerate 4% HP every 2 seconds for the same duration, to a maximum of 12% HP. This kind of weapon here could technically be kind of helpful because you're increasing their HP back up again, which is giving stacks back to Farina, as well as keeping their HP a little bit higher as well to make sure that they're not croaking too early either. And this is also making sure you're getting your burst back with Neuvillette. So there's plenty of different ways that this weapon can be pretty useful, and I would want to say that it is still extremely useful in my personal opinion. Another weapon that you could use is Ballad of the Boundless Blue. I'm not necessarily going to talk its praises because honestly it's not that great of a weapon in my personal opinion. You know, it's an ER main stat weapon, which is already a throw off, but the ability, it was kind of almost made for Neuvillette, but almost as a, like, you know, the event weapon, the 4-star event weapon that kinda doesn't work for the character. And it states that at R5 within 6 seconds after using a normal charge attack when it hits an opponent. Normal attack damage will be increased, which you don't care about, but the charge attack damage will be increased by 12% for 3 stacks, and it can be happening pretty quickly. So technically, you're getting a 36% charge attack damage bonus here. If this is the only weapon you have, don't feel bad about it. It still can be pretty good. The ER main stat is good to get your burst back because, once again, that is the only major way that you're getting a lot of your source water droplets without waiting for that huge long cooldown on that skill to happen every few times. And it only gives 3 away, whereas the burst gives 6 back for those source water droplets. So technically, it is a helpful weapon if you kind of look at it in a certain direction, but if you're talking about something that's really going to help Neuvillette go an extra mile, it can be a little bit difficult to talk about sometimes. Another weapon you can use is Cash Flow Supervision. This is Wriothesley's weapon. They work similarly to an extent, and here basically you get a crit rate main stat, and at level 90 it's 22.1% with a higher base attack, which is a little tough considering Neuvillette doesn't really care for it. And it does increase attack and its ability, which you don't care for again, but when the current HP increases or decreases, which Neuvillette also does, normal attack damage will be increased by 16%, don't care for, but charge attack damage will be increased by 14% for 4 seconds with a max of 3 stacks, sorry. So here it's 14% charge attack with 3 stacks, that's about 42% charge attack damage increase, whereas Ballad of the Boundless Blue, the specific weapon that was an event weapon at R5, that gives 36% at max stacks. So kind of does just depend a little bit, and it does, I guess, increase a little bit to help, once again, a little bit. It's a crit rate main stat. If you accidentally have the weapon, you could throw it on your Neuvillette, but honestly, the buff that his personal weapon gives is still insane. It's even better than the C1 when it's kind of looked at overall. I know a lot of people will chase after the C1 instead, but personally, I think that going after weapons is usually always the best way to do things. Quickly, looking at the last weapon that I really want to talk about is the Widsith. The Widsith can be pretty good because you are getting either an elemental damage bonus buff here, and that's really it. It's a crit damage main stat weapon with the possibility of getting an elemental damage bonus buff. Now, you might be saying, what do you mean by possibility? Well, when the character takes the field, they will gain a random theme song for 10 seconds, either an attack bonus, an elemental damage bonus, or an EM bonus. Isn't EM good for Neuvillette? No, because you're never allowing yourself to vaporize or do anything enough of a reaction because he just does too much hydro that he's overpowering every other element, to the point where the other characters are creating the reactions rather than him, which is making the EM on Neuvillette basically practically useless. And this buff can only occur once every 30 seconds, so it's on a 20-second cooldown after the 10-second buff. So you better hope and pray that you're getting the elemental damage bonus buff, and that's a 1 in 3 chance, and I don't really like those odds. But it is a crit damage main stat weapon, which can be its saving grace. Not that much of a saving grace, but it can be. And talking about the last weapon I want to talk about here for 5 stars is Lost Prayer to the Sacred Winds at 33.1% crit rate at level 90, pretty nice buff. And then when in battle, gain an 8% elemental damage bonus every 4 seconds with a max of 4 stacks. That's 16 seconds maximum on field. I think that he can take probably about 12 seconds on field, which is 3 stacks, and still a solid 24% elemental damage bonus, plus a pretty good amount of crit rate on top of that. I think Lost Prayer can technically be pretty useful for you. Usually with other characters, it's kind of a stat stick, but I think technically with Neuvillette being a non-field damage dealer here, it can allow him to take a little bit more effect to maybe someone like I do, who's a little bit more off-field, like Yai Miko. I know there are other weapons that could be used and can be used, but those are really the ones I wanted to talk about overly for him. Now looking at artifacts, I'm not even going to stress it. They're 94%. Just run Mare Chassé. If you're running anything else, stop. If you're running a 2-piece because you're trying to get a Mare Chassé 4-piece set, that's perfectly fine, obviously. Just once again, you're going to see a very nice increase to everything and just the niceness of the 4-piece Mare Chassé at the end of the day. You could try to be like, well, a 2-piece of HP and another 2-piece of HP could be helpful. Sure, but honestly, 36% crit rate from the 4-piece of Mare Chassé and a charge attack damage of 15% is still going to blow it out of the water in my own personal opinion. Now, looking at main stats you're going to want to get for him, HP percent for the Sands. Don't run an ER Sands, even if you feel like you want his burst back more consistently. Just put another Hydro character in there. Just put other characters that have higher ER to create more particles, or maybe more reactions to create more particles, or their instances of hits will then create more particles for you. The Goblet, there is a debate on whether HP percent or hydro damage bonus is better. From what I've seen from my personal experience using my Neuvillette, even on multiple different teams, I do better with an HP percent goblet. You can run a hydro damage bonus goblet, and a lot of people do, as you can see here, but there is enough people really that run an HP percent goblet that should think about, what do you really see? If it's your 5th piece, like it is for me here, because obviously this is on Tenacity, and I'm not running a 4-piece on Tenacity, you can see that you could technically just run an Hydro Damage bonus one and an HP percent one and see which one's better. Obviously, go for the one that has the better substats. That's the first kind of choice. But if they're about even in substats, like mine kind of were, then just choose the one that you see and test it out and which one does more damage. For me, that was HP percent, and I think from what I've seen, it's usually HP percent. But if you have maybe one that has better substats, like the Hydro Damage bonus one has a 50% crit value on it, then go with that one. If you have one like mine that has pretty good crit and the other one has a pretty good crit ratio, then just choose which one really works better and kind of test it out. That really just does kind of depend on you as a character or you as a player, seeing how the character works and seeing how you like to feel. Maybe that's a little bit better. Personally, because I'm always using him with Kazuha and I'm going to be using him with Xilonen now, it makes even more sense to me to be running an HP percent goblet. So that's just kind of my personal idea with him as a character. The Circlet, on the other hand, is a crit damage main stat usually all the way. As you're going to be running a 4-piece Marechaussee, it's going to be pretty easy if you can to get the 36% from the main stat. Obviously, I talked about how you're getting 12% crit rate times 3, which is 36% when you increase or decrease your HP. You're getting 36% already. You start with 5, and that's already bringing you to 41% HP. If you can get crit rate on just the rest of your substats and just kind of run through kind of getting him a solid crit ratio, then you really probably won't need a crit rate circlet. At the end of the day, though, if you are feeling like everything else is crit damage, every other single piece is just so much crit damage, it's not even funny. Like, you can't, crit rate just won't come onto any of these pieces. Then that's totally fine. Then at that point, what you want to do is probably run a crit rate circlet. The crit rate on the 36% is going to be, I think 31 plus 36 is about like 67 if I can do, wow, that took way too long. About 67% on top of the initial 5 that you get is about 71, and if that's kind of where you're sitting at, if you're sitting between 70 and 80% crit rate with a crit rate circlet, when you already add in the 36% here, because you've got no other crit rate anywhere else, or maybe a little bit, then that might be the way to go. But usually crit damage is going to be the way to go, and honestly, I would say if you do have to run a crit rate circlet, keep grinding the set a little bit longer and try to maybe fix your other pieces as you're looking for a crit damage circlet as well, just because that does make everything a little bit easier. As you can see, I'm sitting at about 44 right now, but as I add 36 on top of this, that brings it to about 80% crit rate. So 80 over however much crit damage you have is going to be a lot better than if you have just like a 90 something crit rate with a lot less crit damage. Once again, figure out what is the best crit ratio for you. With my characters, I tend to try to have a lot higher of a crit rate probably than I need to, but that's just because I want to make sure I'm always critting. So once again, run the crit ratio that you feel that is kind of the best, and that will probably take you where you want to be. Now let's go ahead and look at Constellations though. Obviously, Neuvillette is some of the best Constellations in the game. Being one of the best DPSs, it makes even more sense why he has some of the best Constellations. Looking at the C1, it states that when Neuvillette takes the field, he will obtain one stack of Past Arcana Glories from the passive talent he has, and you must already have that unlocked. Those unlock through leveling the character. Now, when Neuvillette takes the field, he's going to be immediately getting a stack of this, which means you only need to create now 2 of any type of Hydro reaction to then actually make this work. Keep that in mind because you only need to create, even if it is 2 Hydro Swirls, 2 Electrocharge hits, whatever it is, or maybe it's 2 different reactions, it doesn't matter. That can still work, and now you only need 2 instead of 3. It's just a lot quicker to get those buffs for him. Additionally, his interruption resistance will be increased when he uses the charge attack empowerment, legal evaluation, and when he's in his damage hitting of the charge attack equitable judgment. So as he's creating the shield, a lot of people found out that at the C0, and even I did, I actually went and got his C1 while I was pulling for him, but I wanted to, and with most of the characters I have, I want to see how the character works before I get any constellations, and then grab a constellation, see how they work, and if I get like a C2, I'll see how the C1 works versus the C0, and then I'll see how the C2 works as well afterwards, after I unlock it. So I've seen even, it's a very, very annoying when you're kind of just constantly getting knocked out of your legal evaluation and your equitable judgment. What that tends to mean is that you actually have to sometimes run a shielder, running someone like Layla or Zhongli or something like that. And that just might mean that you have to run them that way. And yes, you can kind of put yourself in a precarious situation sometimes with not having a healer in the team, possibly once again with that second passive talent, but keep in mind the amount of times that you can get your skill and burst to heal yourself again. So it's not really that difficult overall. Farina doesn't go past 50%. His own abilities don't go past 50%, taking away from your HP. And if your shielder's doing their job correctly, Neuvillette won't go lower than 50%. But the biggest thing here is making sure you're not getting knocked out of your charge state, or while you're doing the damage either, because that's possibly even worse. So this C1 holds a lot of weight for a lot of Neuvillette mains, and obviously, as you can see, it does for me as well. The C2 states that the passive talent that you get will be enhanced even further. Each stack of Past Arcana Glories will have that little buff based on reactions, but each stack of Past Arcana Glories that you get will also increase the crit damage of charge attack Equitable Judgment by 14%. So you might get the 110, 125, 160% buff, but now you're getting an extra 14, 28, and 48% crit damage on those damage hits as well when you get Past Arcana Glory stacks. A very good constellation. It's about 42% more crit damage, and that's most of the damage that he's going to be doing. Yes, the skill and the burst do damage hits, but it's really not anywhere close to what he does in his actual the amount of damage that he does. From what I've seen, the skill and the burst can put up the same numbers that my charge attacks are doing, but it's only one instance of that, whereas the charge attacks are just multiple instances at one time. The C3 increases the level of the normal attack by 3, increasing his damage that he's doing, the major way he's doing damage, even further. And the C5 increases the level of the burst by 3. The C4 states that when Neuvillette is on the field and is healed, one source water droplet will be generated, and that effect can happen every 4 seconds. Not an amazing constellation, but it does allow for more source water droplets to be on field, which is allowing him to heal himself more, and he's already healing himself with other source water droplets, so this can happen pretty easily and consistently and pretty fast. I would say it could happen every single time you do your legal evaluation, every time you're forming that seal, and then, obviously doing a damage phase of 3 seconds. By the time that's done, one source water droplet will be created, and you have to use your burst or something like that to do it again. Either way, you can technically always have this happening every 4 seconds pretty easily with Neuvillette, so it won't really be that difficult to trigger. It's not necessarily an amazing constellation, it's more of a step stair to the C6. When using the charge attack in the C6, Equitable Judgment, Neuvillette can absorb nearby source water droplets in an AoE. Probably what it means here is a little bit larger of an AoE. Each absorbed droplet will increase the duration of charge attack Equitable Judgment by 1 second. The maximum of those, once again, that we've stated is 3. If you can get 3 extra seconds on top of 3, your now damage phase is 6 seconds long, effectively doubling the amount of damage you can do per charge attack little phase area. And if you can do, once again, a skill and a burst, and that gives you 3 fast instances of 3 seconds, that's 9 seconds, you're now doubling that to 18 seconds. So that's 18 seconds of pure damage that Neuvillette can put out. Once again, effectively doubling the amount of damage you can do. Never mind that additionally, when Equitable Judgment hits opponents, so as he's hitting them with this Hydro Beam, it will fire off 2 additional currents every 2 seconds. And if you're having this happen for 6 seconds times 3 of 18 seconds, this can happen 9 times. That means that is 18 additional currents, and each of these will have 10% of Neuvillette's max HP hitting as Hydro damage. Now you're starting to see why the constellations in Neuvillette are stacking even more. You're getting the 40% crit damage increase here, you're getting the extra little quick buff here, his passive talent's increasing by 160%, you're getting the extra buffs obviously through the damage through the C3, possibly some extra healing and some extra source water droplets that can be occurring here. and obviously the huge amount of damage increase that you're getting through here as well. The constellations that Neuvillette can get are absolutely insane. So any constellations you get on him are pretty good. Obviously the C4 being the worst. If you are getting Neuvillette and you're thinking about, do I go for the C1 or do I go for the weapon? From what I've seen and from what I've heard, the damage numbers do not lie. The C0 R1, so getting the weapon, increases your damage by an insane amount, whereas the C1 doesn't really increase any damage. It's just making sure you're not getting knocked out of the air. In my personal opinion, I feel like that's more worth it. Almost every single time I'll tell someone to grab the weapon or light cone or whatever game I'm talking about, I would rather you grab a weapon or whatnot before you grab a constellation. And 9 times out of 10, that's going to be true, and it is the case here. Grab that weapon, grab Tome of the Eternal Flow before you grab one of these constellations. But if you have the ability to, try to throw some extra wishes in, and it wouldn't really be a bad choice to really grab his C1 if you can. I know a lot of people, especially this time around, are trying to get his C1 because they know that that's kind of the way to go. Or you could go ahead and grab Zhongli on the other side of the banner, and that would also help you not only on a Neuvillette team, but on other characters. So it kind of just does depend on what you actually want for you and your account. There are plenty of different teams that really work with Neuvillette, and I think overall the best team is the one that I'm kind of showing here, the Neuvillette, Furina, Kazuha, and Xilonen team. Xilonen is giving a resistance shred, Kazuha is giving a resistance shred, Kazuha is giving an elemental damage bonus, Xilonen's giving an elemental damage bonus, Furina is dropping HP, but Xilonen's healing it. Furina is giving a huge damage buff that is helping Neuvillette. Furina and Neuvillette are combined 2 Hydro characters, giving both of them higher damage increases by increasing their HP, also allowing characters like Xilonen and Kazuha to stay alive a little bit longer by increasing their HP, because of the resonance that you get here. How you'll probably start the team off is usually probably running like a Furina skill burst into Xilonen, skill, a bunch of normal attacks burst, Kazuha skill and burst, and to, Neuvillette just skill burst and charge attack till Kingdom Come. Very, very easy to run, not that really difficult to kind of put together. Now, this is a very stacked team of straight 5 stars. One of the best teams you're going to see in the game. But you might be saying, okay, I don't have these 2. Or maybe I do have Kazuha, or maybe I do have Xilonen, but okay, show me just Furina and Neuvillette. Because if you're going to have anything, having those 2 together is going to be the best way to do things. We need to keep in mind that we're not trying to do, any attack buff, so Bennett's practically useless. But I would say that if you don't have Kazuha, the next way to kind of throw in a character to be useful here, even if you don't have a Xilonen or something like that, is going to be throwing in someone who can replace that idea. Someone like Jean, someone like Venti, someone like Sucrose, who can run a 4-piece Viridescent set instead of someone like Kazuha to still give you the extra resistance shred of whatever element they swirled. And considering we've only got Hydro characters so far, this is going to be the best way to do things. Now you might be saying, okay, even if I have this team, even if I have whatever, what if I don't have, a shielder? Or what if I don't have a healer what if I don't have the C1? I don't want to get knocked around and get knocked out of my charge attack phase very easily. Well, that might be a job for an actual shielder at that point.
We may leave at
Also, allowing yourself another area. Keep in mind that you're trying to make sure to create reactions consistently with someone like Neuvillette. Once again, for the 4-piece or the second passive. Once again, you're trying to use other characters here. Jean can be helpful, but also Layla, considering she's constantly attacking from off-field and she's a shielder. You're allowing, these characters to create reactions to allow the past Draconic Glory stacks to happen for Neuvillette, which is still tied to that passive talent he has. So there's little things here and there that you're always going to want to try to do. Even if you don't, let's say, I don't have Jean, I don't have any Animo user or anyone that has a Viridescent set on that could actually be useful in the team, what should I be doing? Throwing in the next thing that was probably going to be useful is, once again, we saw someone like Yao Yao who can be a healer for the team. But once again, let's say you don't have any shielders or any useful shielders or something like that. Well, at that point, keep your distance and run someone like Fischl or Yaimiko, or someone who's going to have a lot of constant maybe reactions that are happening with Hydro from off field. I always loved specifically like Fischl or something, or Yaimiko, to create Taser or Electro Charge from off field to allow the stacks to constantly happen for Neuvillette no matter what. Even though it goes for 30 seconds, I never really have to worry about it. Fischl also does some pretty good damage as well, so that's pretty helpful. But that can be something to do as well. There are plenty of different characters. Obviously, animal characters are going to be up there, making sure they're using that buff. You could even use someone like Kachina, even if you really wanted to. Kachina can also, I believe, uses mainly, from at least what I would say, is going to be the Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City, which is still the buff that you're getting from Xilonen as well, that elemental damage bonus. So it still can be pretty helpful as well if you use someone like Kachina or someone who uses that 4-piece set. That can be helpful. There are no other real strong candidates for, like buffing besides that. The other characters to really use, once again, are just going to be characters that are mainly focusing, I think, on creating reactions. So characters like Yayamiko, characters like Beidou even.
Nice,
If you have Beidou or Yao Yao, one of the teams that I used to run, probably the best team before Xilonen, was swapping out Xilonen with Beidou, an amazing healer here. And if you want, a step below that, you're looking at someone like Yao Yao. And if you're thinking, okay, well, I don't have Kazuha, though, and you can throw in your Venti, or you can, which is also extremely good because of his crowd control. He can just hold enemies in place as, Neuvillette just beams them to death. And you can get rid of Kazuha, though, and put Venti in there, or throw Jean in there, or throw Sucrose in there, who I don't have built. Anything like that, and you've got 2 solid healers here, so if you're dying by some unbeknownst reason to me, I would be very surprised. But there is another way for these teams to work, and honestly, with Neuvillette, yes, he can work without Furina, but 9 times out of 10, I'm going to tell you, and honestly, 10 times out of 10, I'm just going to tell you to use Neuvillette with Furina. I don't think I've ever found a situation for myself where I've wanted to use Neuvillette outside of a Furina team, or without Furina. They work so perfectly in tandem together, and they even have little matching outfits too, so it makes even more sense. But overall, that's kind of the idea with at least most of the teams that you're going to be seeing here. Once again, though, if you're saying, okay, Vixen, I don't care about any of the other things, I'm going to be pulling the best team in Genshin Impact right now, or at least the best team for Neuvillette. Neuvillette, Furina, Kazuha, Xilonen. That's it. Okay, and what else should you be grabbing? A C1, R1 on Neuvillette, grab his weapon, grab his first constellation. You can grab any constellations, 1 or 2 on Furina. That can be helpful. Kazuha, practically useless, really, on this specific team to really grab any constellations, but Xilonen C2 is also extremely strong. That's how you're really going to make the best, most usefulness out of someone like Neuvillette. But enough of me yapping about teams and how Neuvillette works. Now, it's time to show you.
Into the wind.
Letting great dreams echo!
Settle down. Be sanctified. Silence.
One with nature.
Cling it! Let the mountains fade spoil! Time to shine!
One with wind and cloud. Seems like an emergency.
Bow your head. The time beckons.
The wind knows me. Mind the side.
Silence. Let the mighty be humble.
I swear by my sword! The night is cold.
Settle down. Let the mighty be humble. bow your head. Let the mighty be humble. Settle down.
Let the world fly! Wings of darkness! Come, sever neck to ashes!
Be sanctified. Silence!
Stop that! Lightning, echoing song! Power that ended Fischl!
Let the mighty be humble.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed looking at the gameplay a little bit. Let me know if you guys have any other ideas, maybe specifically how you guys use your own Neuvillette in other teams, or maybe if there was a different way that you guys are kind of building him in a different way. Maybe, once again, are there other characters? Do you feel like the Fischl and Kazuha Xilonen is the best team? In my personal opinion, from what I've seen, I think it is. Do you think that there are other teams that are going to be better and more useful? Go ahead and let me know down in the comments. Or do you completely agree with me and you're like, you know what, Vixen, you're 100% right. And you know what? I definitely need some of that. So go ahead and tell me that in the comments. But jokes aside, let me know what you guys think about overall about Neuvillette. Do you guys think that is he worth it to pull right now before someone like Mawika? Is it really worth it? And if you guys did, obviously, because this is a build guide, do you guys feel like it was worth it? And obviously, I guess we'll be able to see that a little bit more once we get someone like Mawika in the future, who we will be doing a build guide on. But thank you guys once again for watching the video. Please go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.